Supercell just nerfed every single hypercharge in the game, where now, instead of having whatever stats they used to have, every single hypercharge now has 20% bonus speed, 5% bonus damage, and 5% bonus shield, which when you first look at it, it's a good thing, so hypercharges won't be as toxic and as strong as they were. But does this really fix hypercharges? And the easy answer is no. Nerfing all of the stats of the hypercharge is a good thing, but it makes the strongest hypercharges weak, which I guess it's good, but it makes the weakest hypercharges just straight up unusable. I wonder how Colt will even survive this meta. Bro has gotta be on life support at this point. But it just is a so superficial change to the hypercharges. It's a very mid and honestly somewhat insignificant nerf, because the strong hypercharges will still be the strongest hypercharges and the weakest hypercharge will still be the weakest hypercharges. So with this in mind, how can you actually fix hypercharges? And in order to do that, we first need to understand what are the hypercharges' actual issues. And in my opinion, there are three major problems with the hypercharges. The first one, which I feel like at this point it's common sense, is that the hypercharges are just way too brain dead. You just click purple button and you just win most of the times, especially with the most recent hypercharges. And even though stat buffs did make hypercharges even more brain dead, I feel like just reducing them, it doesn't really fix that much of the issues. It makes it slightly more bearable to deal with, but the problem is still there. Getting the hypercharge, it's easy. Using the hypercharge, it's way too easy, and it has essentially no risk of failing. Hypercharges, or at least I think, were meant to be a high-risk play that could lead to high reward. It is the last ability that you get from the brawler, so it should be an ability that is complex and that is based around everything you know about the brawler. It should require at least a little bit of experience in order to get good value from it. But does any hypercharge needs any of that? No. All of the hypercharges are just far too simple, honestly, and provide way too much value. If the so-called high-risk play has no risks, it's just a guaranteed win. There are no downsides in using your hypercharge, which lead to hypercharges being really brain dead. Now, the second issue with the hypercharges is that hypercharges are just way too easy to get. Now, before you crucify me or something like that, I'm not talking about their gold cost or their gem cost. I feel like those costs are actually pretty reasonable right now. What I am talking about, it is actually the random chance of just suddenly getting a hypercharge. With so many events and random rewards that have a chance to give you a hypercharge, most of the casual players get their hypercharges not from an investment in gold. No, most of them get them because they got them on a random star drop or a hypercharge star drop that they got from a random event. This, the majority of the time, happens to brawlers that you do not have maxed out, meaning that for the majority of the free-to-play players, it is way much safer and honestly, up to a certain extent, a lot smarter to level up a brawler that you already have the hypercharge unlocked, because hypercharges are just such a safe bonus power to your brawler. So it's only logical for them to upgrade a brawler that already has the max power unlocked essentially. And this makes so that these players who probably otherwise wouldn't have much knowledge about this brawler that they are currently maxing out to be their new main. Suddenly they're playing a brawler that they might not even like just for the sake of they having the hypercharge. Now, this might not sound too bad at first, but this completely disrupts the way you progress in the game. Instead of gaining skill and knowledge about one brawler, you're just praying to the RNG gods that they give you your hypercharge and therefore your next new main. You're never really getting good at the game, you're just playing with a different brawler and farming those trophies for as long as you can, or as long as people don't know how to counter your hypercharge. And this kinda leads to another issue, because if people have a really complex hypercharge in their hands that does not give them instantly a team wipe, it can be frustrating. Just imagine, you just invested 4,000 gold and 2,000 power points into something that usually is very good. Usually it means that you'll get the entire enemy team killed, and you're not being able to do that. That could be frustrating. It's a failed investment, and the player will not be happy, and that leads to frustration, which can lead to them potentially not wanting to play the game anymore. But the other side of the coin is also important. What happens when you face a purple glowing brawler that is doing random nonsense that you've never seen in your life? That can also be frustrating. One thing is losing to someone or something that you understand. You learn from the mistakes. You will hope that you will not commit the same mistake ever again and never fail against that same situation. But if you don't even understand what you lost to, how can you possibly expect to recover from it? How can you possibly learn from that mistake? And the answer is simple: you don't. Which will most likely lead to the frustration of the player, which will make them not wanting to play the game, therefore they stop playing the game, which is something that Supercell clearly does not want. And this is all just because of the progression and because of events in general, because they make random hypercharges appear way too soon, which honestly it is just a massive issue that is limiting the potential of hypercharges so much. Which leads us to our final and personally the most important issue of them all. Hypercharges are all the same. They all have the speed buff, the damage buff, the shield buff, which now it's even the same value, so it's even easier and less complex to understand. And all of the hypercharges simply have that one buff to the super. Which even worse, did you know that right now 73% of the hypercharges have as part of their mechanic or has their entire mechanic giving you more supers? Which it's insane. And just to be clear, what I mean by this is that, for example, Morty's hypercharge, your super is a boomerang. You have technically two supers. Belle's super is stupidly guided. Hank's super is guided. Fang's super passes through walls. Nani's super gets bigger. Spike's super is bigger. Meg's super is bigger. Shelly's super is bigger. Maisie's super has more projectiles. It's almost every single hypercharge, which by the way, most of these hypercharges are considered the strong hypercharges, are just you getting more supers, which is honestly very lame at the same time and so uninteresting, which it's so sad to see how hypercharges have just became this pretty basic and somewhat boring mechanic. Hypercharges right now are like this. Imagine every single brawler got a new gadget, and it would be essentially that Gus super knockback effect. The only difference is the bonus effect that the pushback would have. Now, some brawlers would have a lot more value out of the pushback, such as snipers and throwers, but tanks or brawlers like Mortis, El Primo would not get nearly as much value. Now, you could counter this by giving the pushback a really strong effect, like a freaking 2-second stun. And there you go, you have a broken ability. But all of the abilities are the same, would be a pushback with just some random extra on the top, which again, it's so uncreative. And honestly, it makes me really sad to see that hypercharges are like this and have been like this for essentially 3 years. So now that we already know what the issues of the hypercharges are, let's actually fix those issues. And the most important one, it is to fix the progression issue with the hypercharges. You get the hypercharges too quickly and because of the RNG as well. So what I would do, and I feel like this would actually fix most of the issues, is that you would only get the hypercharge from a brawler that you already maxed out, which actually is the exact same way with star powers and gadgets. So I don't really understand why hypercharges got a special treatment on this one, but essentially you would only get the hypercharge if you actually already maxed out that one brawler, forcing you to, instead of upgrading the brawler that you just got its hypercharge out of nowhere, you would instead learn how to play with that brawler, want yourself to upgrade him to power 11 to maybe eventually get the hypercharge, or maybe even buy the hypercharge with coins, which would make the progression and the skill expression of the brawler that you're choosing to play with a lot smoother, and honestly just a lot more fun in general, because you would know what you were doing with that one brawler. And now that we make hypercharges requiring more knowledge of your part about the brawler that you're playing and the game in general, we can make the hypercharges more complex, having more mechanics, different than the usual, different ways of charging, other mechanics that I'll talk in a bit, which would hopefully lead to the hypercharges not being as basic and as brain dead as they are right now. And the only way to explain this, it's honestly with a couple of examples. So here are a couple of ideas of reworks that certain hypercharges could get that would hopefully make all of them more strategic and more about the brawler that you're playing with. So, first example would be Juju. Her hypercharge would cost 1.67 supers, and the only duration that it would have would literally be her next super. So you activate the hypercharge and it will only affect your next super. No stat buffs, and the only effect would be that Gris, depending on the environment where he would be born, he would gain bonus attributes. On the ground he would get a 35% shield, on grass he would be 35% faster, and on the water he would spawn puddles of water very similar to Barry, which would heal its teammates by 500 HP per second. So really grabbing Juju's mechanic and also applying it to the hypercharge. Next we would have Pearl, and it would cost 2.22 supers, and the duration of the hypercharge would actually be the hit bar itself. The way it would work, it's simple. When you activate the hypercharge, you would have in a certain way a new hit bar, which would be the hypercharge hit bar, which it would work very similar to your regular hit bar, except it would not fill up at any time, meaning that if you had your hit bar full when you activated the hypercharge, you would get more value out of the hypercharge itself. And the buff of the actual hypercharge is that when you shoot or use the super, you actually would deal the damage that you would deal if you had the hit when you activated the hypercharge. So explaining, if you had your hypercharge when you were at full heat, essentially all of your attacks and super would deal maximum damage, even if your hit bar or the hypercharge hit bar is saying that you're at 50%. Because you activated the hypercharge at full heat, you would deal the full damage, making Pearl just an insane damage dealer, honestly. And even on top of that, your super would still create that fire area that Pearl's nowadays hypercharge has, and while Pearl is standing on that heat area, all of the heat that she would use would be cut in half. Meaning that if you use the super, not only would use less 50%, so using the super wouldn't instantly end your hypercharge essentially, but all of your next attacks would waste your hypercharge duration by 50% less, which is another great advantage. And just to be clear, to make sure that the hypercharge is not just a straight up nerf, once the hypercharge duration or the hypercharge heat bar goes to 0, you go back to your original amount of heat that you had before activating the hypercharge. This one actually ended up being more complex than I thought, but these would make Pearl just a really great damage dealer with the hypercharge. Next we would have Chester, which would cost 2.85 supers, and the duration would, just like Juju, only be the next super. And on this hypercharge, you would literally combine all of the supers into one. which would be very similar to how his Hypercharge super is right now, but instead of knockback, that super would deal half a second stun, and the slow zone would also heal your teammates. No stat buffs at all in this Hypercharge, pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and because there wouldn't be as much damage on the Hypercharge, and because you would actually only literally have one Hypercharge super, the Hypercharge could now be cheaper, allowing you to have more Hypercharges throughout the entirety of the game. Next we would have Lola, and this one would also be very different. It would actually even work more like a gadget. So it would cost 2 supers, and it would actually have an unload time of half a second. So you know how Frank stops completely to shoot out that super? Essentially these would work in a very similar way. And once that unload time is finished, you would summon 3 egos around you in a triangular shape, very similar to Tara's second gadget, which would lose 20% of their HP per second. So for a very small duration, you would have an insane amount of damage, especially if you could keep those egos alive. Now do remember that because the egos would spawn very close to you, they would still deal less 50% damage, but you would have 3 of them. You would have a good amount of projectiles and a very good amount of damage, which, because it would only last 5 seconds, I feel like it's honestly pretty fair that it would only take 2 supers. Next we would have Belle. It would cost 2.22 supers, and this one would have stat buffs. You would have plus 15% speed, plus 15% damage, and plus 15% shield. And the duration, it's the strategic part. It would always last 2 seconds, plus until the Hypercharge targeted enemy is defeated. So the Hypercharge target would essentially pause the Hypercharge duration. So while you have one enemy that is targeted, you'd have all of those good stat buffs, making it a choice if you want to actually just straight up kill the enemy or if you want to keep him alive. And if you end up killing him, you will also be rewarded with 1 instant ammo reloaded and healing 50% of the missing HP. And just to be clear, this super would no longer be insanely guided. So now you would really have to aim well your super to get all of those bonus stats and even the killing bonus effect, which would make playing with Belle a little bit more strategic, especially with this new Hypercharge. And finally, a more simple Hypercharge, we would have Poco. Since he's a rare brawler as well, the Hypercharge should be slightly simpler than the usual. It would take 2.85 supers, it would have a duration of 8 seconds, so a pretty good duration, and the super would heal an additional 50% to allies, which would be under 50% of their HPs. So a good timing on the super would be more rewarded with this Hypercharge. And on top of that, any overhealed allies would gain that overheal has HP, and while they have the HP, they are protected from negative effects, which, if you don't know what that is just essentially Poco's second gadget. So a lot of versatility with this Hypercharge, because if you want, you can use it just for brute heals essentially with a good timing, which could be very good, or you could try to play more of a control build in a certain way, I guess, and go for the negative effects protection, which could also be really good since that shield can last 5 seconds. So a good amount of versatility on this Hypercharge, and I believe relatively simple mechanics for a rare brawler. But at the end of the day, that is just my opinion. What are your thoughts on the Hypercharges right now? Which Hypercharge would you like to eventually receive a reward? Because there are a lot of Hypercharges that desperately need something right now. And honestly, would you like for me to make a video about rewarding the Hypercharge? It's an idea that I'm open to, and I would really like to know your opinion. So write it in the comments down below. Trust me, I will read them, and I'll see you all on the next video.